Hi, Seeker. Welcome back. Welcome to episode 13 of the Authentic Life podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about your truth versus a belief versus an opinion. And this topic was inspired by a reel I saw by Gabby Bernstein, where she is talking about showing up with your truth. Here it is.
All it takes is the light in one person to wake up the light in someone else. And so it's not just about me standing here being your teacher. It's about you all waking up so you can go teach everybody in your life. So you can teach your Twitter followers, so you can teach your Facebook friends, so you can teach your lovers, your partners, your parents, whoever is in your life, so you can be a messenger for a more empowering conversation. And sometimes all you have to do is just show up with your truth to be teaching. All you have to do is just show up with your truth, and you are the most divine teacher in that room.
So I noticed in that clip, it kind of dawned on me that there is a very, very fundamental and foundational nuance, call it discernment, that's missing in the idea of what a truth is, what it means to show up with your truth. And it's creating a lot of misunderstanding. Unfortunately, speaking your truth and this concept of truth with a capital T has become somewhat of a buzzword, right? As what happens in pop culture. And y'all know how I feel about buzzwords if you've been following me on Instagram and have been on my email list. Buzzwords are such breeding grounds for a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of confusion, because they lack nuance, they lack discernment, and they are so ambiguous because they can be interpreted in so many different ways by so many different people at so many different times. And so here is another clip by a spiritual teacher with a large platform. This is Phil Good, where he is using truth in a ambiguous and misinterpretable way.
I'd like to ask you a very honest question this morning, because I think this can be life-changing for all of us. Why does someone else sharing their truth trigger you so much? Why? Why does someone expressing their feelings and their thoughts and their perspectives trigger you so much? I'll tell you why. Because you haven't embodied your own truth yet. That is the truth. Because to be able to freely share how you're feeling is to be free. And freedom is a scary thing. So could it be that them being free enough to share their truth, could it be that they're showing you that you haven't stepped into your freedom yet because you're too afraid? See, the very judgment that you pass on to others is what's keeping you separate from the wholeness of who you are.
So this is actually pretty fucking toxic, okay? Not only is it harmful because, not only is it confusing because it lacks a framework, it lacks discernment. We'll get into that. But I just want to point out that this is what these spiritual teachers do, which is it's very gaslighty, right? Where they do the very thing that they are supposedly against. So actually, this clip is full of so much judgment, and it's so separatist, and it's so invalidating to the human experience that it just, he goes on for 90 seconds, right? And I literally just want to go point by point and just debunk this whole nonsense. I will spare you from doing that. Instead, I will provide a framework for how we can critically examine ideas around truth, ideas around speaking your truth, showing up with your truth, triggering people with your truth, or people getting triggered by your truth, because there's like so many layers there, and there's such a depth of perspective in also understanding the mechanism of the mind in what happens when our truth bleeds into our beliefs, and that becomes our opinions. I mean, there's a whole mechanism there, right? And if we don't understand that, then first of all, we're going to be very confused, and more importantly, we're going to be very vulnerable to all kinds of indoctrination and thought reform that bypass our critical thinking and put us in this kind of self-hypnosis where we are reconstructing our identity and our entire reality around an illusion, because we're not able to discern between reality and illusion, which is literally what being awake is. So without further ado, let's dive right into today's episode on how to discern between your truth versus beliefs versus opinions, and why that's so important in reality testing when we are doing cult deprogramming or any kind of psychological deprogramming work. And not just deprogramming, but also just critical thinking in general. Also just the ability to have a framework for examining claims and any statements or beliefs, theories, whatever it is. So I'm so glad that you're here. This is going to be a great episode. This is going to be a foundational episode because it's going to give you so much more clarity and insight into your mind in a substantial way. So I think what is happening here, which is where the misunderstanding starts, is how the New Age industry has appropriated, or you can say co-opted, this concept of sat-chit-ananda. Sat-chit-ananda, which means truth, consciousness, bliss, and it comes from Hinduism. And the definition, or what the concept describes, is our subjective experience of ultimate or supreme reality, which is the nature of reality, which they call Brahman. So sat-chit-ananda, truth, consciousness, bliss, is our subjective experience of ultimate or supreme reality. And this gets tricky. Why? Because our subjective reality is not separate from ultimate reality, right? Because in non-duality, each thing is contained in everything, and everything is contained in each thing. So our subjective reality is contained in the ultimate reality, and the ultimate reality is contained in our subjective reality. So to put it another way, our truth is contained in the truth with a capital T, and the truth contains our truth with a lowercase t. And where we get tripped up is when we mistake our truth with the truth, our capital T truth with the uppercase T truth. But even though each thing is contained in the other, one does not replace the other, right? Meaning we can't use these interchangeably. We have to discern what is our truth from the truth. Because again, that's the only way we will know truth from illusion, if we're on this path of awakening. So because there's no foundational understanding of sat-chit-ananda, it's like so watered down. It's been extracted, right? It's become like the truth, which it contains sat-chit-ananda. It's just become this like buzzword, and so much misconceptions have grown out of it. And one of those misconceptions is truth versus belief versus opinion, because we don't know, because we're not discerning, we don't know when our truth ends and when our belief begins, and when our belief ends and when our opinions begin. And although they sort of melt and merge within each other, discernment is so important, because otherwise you're going to show up and you're going to be like, this is my truth, and you actually mean this is my opinion, but you're going to think that it's the ultimate truth, and you're going to align yourself with some doctrine or dogma. And then when people like call you out on it because it's like fucking like harmful and like authoritarian, you're gonna be like, oh, you are just triggered by my truth because you're not free to express yours or whatever. It's like, no, I'm actually triggered. I can't even say I'm triggered. I'm just like bothered by the fact that you're framing your truth as the truth, and then you're using that to indoctrinate people into a belief system or an ideology that you have decided is the ultimate truth. And so language is also really important here, but like if you understood the concept, you would know how to use the language, right? So these two spiritual teachers who I played with massive followings, like either they don't understand the concept themselves or they just don't care. Doesn't matter. So what is truth? Okay, so how does sat-chit-ananda get misinterpreted? Well, if you look at the definition or the concept, what it's alluding to is two parts, right? There are two parts. There's the subjective reality, which is our truth, and the ultimate reality, which is the truth, both of which are distinct and contained within each other. It's like a drop in the ocean, right? So subjective reality is our truth, which is just one drop, and the ultimate reality is the whole ocean. And what's happening is that subjective part is getting missed, but it's the most important part, because actually the subjectivity of our truth is what makes it so valid. That's what adds that validity. That's why our truth is so like sacred and like indestructible. Like you can't fuck with anyone's truth, right? And so then it becomes easy to be like, oh, this is my truth, and you're like, you're allowed to have your truth, I'm allowed to have my truth. But this is actually devaluing. Using it this way, in this like misconceived way, is actually devaluing our truth, because if our truth was not subjective, it would not be unique, right? If you believe that we are unique expressions of one consciousness, which is the non-dual framework, then what's the uniqueness? The uniqueness about it is that it's our truth, that it's a part of us that is so unknowable to to anyone else, right? This is an unknowable arena. So when somebody says, this is my truth, there's something happening inside their body and their field that you can never understand because you're not in their body, right? So when we make our truth to be the truth, that it's like we're just blending into the entire ocean. We lose that individuality and that uniqueness. So the subjectivity is what makes it valid and unique, which brings up another interesting aspect of that. And it's that as we are, a unique expression, right? One way that consciousness and God and Source expresses itself. Where was I going with this? Oh, yes, that's exactly what makes it inconsistent. That's the word. So our truth is valid because it's subjective, but because it's subjective, it is inconsistent. Because consciousness itself is inconsistent, right? There's so we'll talk more about this because there is a point at which it's unchanging, right? And that's the access point to the supreme reality. So I mean, this is like getting so cerebral, but we really miss the plot when we finalize our truth. When we say, this is my truth, and that's it, we're actually divorcing ourselves from the ultimate truth. Because it is through our subjective truth. You see, the truth, our truth, when we say my truth, and again, this is from the non-dualism framework. When you say my truth, it's a melting and merging that happens with all of life. And life is inconsistent, right? It's like the weather, right? It's like the weather saying, I'm going to be sunny and that's my truth. Like, that doesn't make any sense because it's always changing. And so when we say this is my truth and that's it, it's like we're cutting ourselves off from life energy, from source, because the truth is only a vehicle. Like, there's this people make such a big deal about their truth. It's like become this like fetishized thing. Like, it's actually, the truth is just a tool. It's just a vehicle. It is an access point to supreme reality, to that part of ourselves that is unchanging. And we can use the breath as an example to illustrate this. So the breath, right, when we sit down to meditate and we're watching the breath, why are we doing that exercise? Are we doing it for the sake of watching the breath? Like, we're just watching the breath to watch the breath? No, right? There is an intention there that, or whatever, even when we're movement, right? Like, in a meditative way, any form of meditation that we accept as a meditative process, as a spiritual process, it's the intention is to use that, going back to the breath, is to use the breath as a vehicle, as a transportation to ultimate reality. And we watch the breath. And what happens with the breath? The breath is constantly changing, right? There's no point at which the one moment is the same as the other. And there's a contraction there as well as an expansion there. And then the expansion happens within the contraction, right? Like, so our chest expands, but while our chest expands, the bridge of our nose or nasal cavities or whatever, they're like contracting, right? So there's a expansion and contraction that happens within each other. So also this idea that like, oh, if you're contracted, that means you're like in low energy. Actually, that's not true, because there's always, if there's a contraction, there's also an expansion happening somewhere. And the breath just illustrates that so beautifully, right? And so when we use the breath as a vehicle to the access point of supreme reality, to that which is unchanging, what's happening is we're getting very close to the breath, so that the breath, we're dissolving the breath, the boundaries around the breath inside and outside and within and without dissolve, and we melt and merge with the energetic field of life itself, right? But we have to go through that change, and we have to watch it. We have to learn. The practice is in learning how to watch it, and how to witness it as a constant transforming and contracting and expanding, and behind that, not underneath it, but behind that, in the backdrop of all of that change and turmoil. Not that the breath is turmoil, but we're just using the breath as an illustration. So it can be anything, any object, right? Whether those are thoughts or sensations or moods or feelings, all of this is just kind of, when you watch it, you notice how much it changes. And beyond that, there's silence, there's emptiness, there is nothingness. And that's what's important here. Not your truth. Your truth is not that important. I mean, it's valid, right? It's subjective, it's meaningful, but in terms of it being this like big deal, people just make such a big deal out of their truth. It's like making a big deal out of the breath, right? It's like saying, no, my breath is going to be slow. It's like going into meditation practice and being like super dogmatic about it. Like, I'm going to meditate and my breath is going to be slow and steady. Or I'm going to meditate and my breath is going to be deep in my belly. It's like, chill out. Just meditate and just see what happens and just go with it. And don't make these preconceived ideas. Don't box yourself in to what your breath is supposed to be. Just be. Just experience, right? And that's what people do when they box themselves in with the truth. So if you find yourself finalizing a truth, now you're no longer in truth territory. Now you're going into beliefs and opinions, and we'll talk about that next. So let's talk about how a truth becomes a belief, and the mechanism of that, and then how belief becomes an opinion. So of course it's just for teaching purposes, it sounds like I'm being like very categorical. Of course, there's like a lot of fluidity there, and hopefully like once we get through conceptualizing it, you'll see, there is a lot of fluidity there. So it's not just like, dogmatically, like this is a belief and this is an opinion, these are the definitions. It's not like that, right? We're just conceptualizing. So a truth becomes a belief when it is reinforced over time. And a belief becomes an opinion when it is reinforced over time. So how does this work? In order to understand how this works, we need to discern between first order and second order reality. And if you were to see this in writing, this sentence would be in all caps. Another big misconception is thinking that there's only one reality in which our truth can occur, or there's a unidimensional experience of reality. Because even though these spiritual teachers talk about like multidimensional beings, it's like there's something missing there. And I would like to point to Harish, who is Christopher Wallace. He's known as Harish. He's a Tantra teacher and has a really great YouTube video on discerning between first order and second order reality. And it's a really beautiful discourse that I highly recommend. And I'll link it in the show notes. But just to put it briefly, So first order reality is how you experience reality before you have any thoughts about it. Okay, like the breath. So you don't think about how you're going to experience the breath, right? In one moment to the next. You just experience it. You're just there for the experience. It's the same with your moods, with your feelings, with your sensations, right? These are not things that you choose to experience. They just happen. And when I say feelings, I'm really talking about emotions. Oh, sorry. I'm talking about like affect, like whether you feel positive affect, like whether you feel positive, negative, or neutral, like in your body, in your nervous system. I'm not talking about emotions because that which becomes your thoughts and emotions are already venturing into like second order reality. So in first order reality, you can't control it, right? You can only experience your being directly or watch it and watch how it changes, watch how it ebbs and flows. This is your truth in the first order reality. So going back to the subjectivity of it, and this is, I want to just point out the paradox of truth, right? That gets missed. Because the truth is always a paradox. There's always a paradox there. And the paradox of truth is that because the first order reality, right, the direct experience of reality is so subjective, no one can possibly tell you how you are experiencing your reality, your first order reality, right? A lot of times, most often, we don't even know how we're experiencing our reality because we're not present. We have to be very, very present to witness our direct experience of reality. And so, because it is so deeply personal and because it's so subjective, our truth, right? This is our truth, is what makes it valid, but it also is what makes it not true, not the truth. Remember that our truth is just an access point for supreme reality. So the paradox of truth is that the very thing that makes our truth so valid is its subjectivity. And it's the subjectivity of our truth that makes it an illusion. So do you see why? Do you see why when someone says, that's my truth, they are so caught up and they say it in like a final way, right? They're not saying it in like in a meditative process, right? The way that we do in meditation, the way that we do in self-inquiry, but they're really making a statement. They're really taking a stand for something and they're calling it their truth. Do you see why now that they are so caught up in an illusion? And this person who is showing up with their truth and expecting you to just adopt it as the truth just does not know how to discern between reality and illusion. So I would not take this person's advice. So now let's talk about second order reality, because that's also part of your truth, but it's a little bit less subtle. Meaning it can be inferred a little bit better by others, right? We can make inferences about how someone is maybe interpreting their reality based on what they say, because it's not so much a direct experience. It's an interpretation, it's a conceptualization, it's a judgment, and they still have to tell us, right, how they're interpreting things. But we can still make some inferences based on, what we know about them, based on some of the examples that they're using or logic, or all I'm saying is that the second order reality is a little bit less subtle. And the second order reality, as I said, is an interpretation of the first order reality. And Christopher Wallace does a really nice job of describing second order reality as a representation of our experience. It's like a collection. He describes it as a collection of stories and narratives that tell us something key about ourselves and the unknowable and the unknown. So again, that unknowable is contained within us. So it's through that knowable within us, within our truth, that we contact the unknown, right? Again, it's a vehicle. And the way that you experience your first order reality is going to impact your second order reality, which is where your beliefs manifest. Because your beliefs are based on your subjective interpretation of first order reality. So, what we call my truth is really an interpretation of our subjective experience of reality. It's either our direct experience of reality, which we can communicate, which is very difficult because how can you communicate about the breath as you're experiencing it? You can. This is what we practice in non-dualism self-inquiry, but that's really not what's going on most of the time when we're having conversations about the truth, my truth. When we're saying my truth, what we're really talking about is the way that we are interpreting our subjective experience of reality. And the reason why this is valid is because it really says something about what matters most to us, what's important to us, right? It alludes to something about our core values. The way that we interpret our subjective experience of reality says something about what we deeply, deeply care about and long for in like the depths of our soul. And for the most of us, this is connection, it's love, it's belonging. We long to feel connected to ourselves, to each other, to nature, to God, and we long to belong. And our beliefs, meaning our subjective interpretations of reality, are expressions of that, which are also subjective, but they're a little bit more dense than the truth. If we think about it like energetically, right? Your truth is very, very subtle. It's changing. Beliefs are a little bit more dense, but they still hold value simply because they matter to you. And, I don't really see beliefs, I don't frame beliefs as right or wrong. I look at them more on the scale of like dogma versus flexibility. So you can believe whatever you want, right? But if you are dogmatic about it, that means that you are married to your beliefs, which means that you're likely looking at the world through a myopic lens, and you're more likely to impose your beliefs on others. You're more likely to have to be misled by your beliefs. And it goes without saying that imposing your beliefs on others is inappropriate because everyone is entitled to their own beliefs. But what people like Phil Good and Gabby Bernstein do is they actually do impose their beliefs on others because they don't like they take their truth, they align their truth with their beliefs in like a very finalized sort of way. And they impose that onto others, which is like, that's what's like very culty about it. And at the same time, they talk about how every truth can coexist. It's like, actually there's a contradiction there, right? You can see the cognitive dissonance that happens when someone is telling you, I'm entitled to my truth, but at the same time, they are imposing their beliefs on you dishonestly, covering them up as a truth. Anyway, it's like so like, it's just like mental fuckery. So just to recap, the way you experience your truth over and over again becomes part of your second order reality, which produces beliefs. So I should say it more like this: the way that you experience your first order reality over and over again becomes part of your second order reality, which produces beliefs that say something about what matters to you. So this second order reality is a mental activity, right? It's from the mind. So it's also very fleeting and temporary, which is why we can value our beliefs, but we shouldn't harden them into dogma, because then we start to shapeshift our entire reality around an illusion. And illusion in this case, I don't mean as it's not real. Illusion in the sense that it is temporary. And so, shape-shifting our reality, constructing an entire reality, an entire identity around an illusion, around something that is might change, or is likely to change, or is most definitely gonna change, because all things that come from the mind change and are temporary. You can see how that is problematic and how it creates a lot of confusion. And you can also see how cults indoctrinate you through your beliefs, right? Because then they catch you at a moment when you've mistaken your truth for a belief, and it's hardened into dogma. And then that just, once you're in a dogmatic state of mind, the ego is just looking for things to latch onto. And we latch on to whatever we're being indoctrinated into. So I don't know if I explained that the best way, but I hope that you just can take away that your beliefs are, although they are temporary, they're connected to our identity, which also creates some potential areas for confusion. Anyway, let's move on to what is an opinion. So an opinion is more dense. Okay, an opinion is a belief that has been reinforced over time. More dense as in energetically is more dense, and it's just more difficult to change. Okay, beliefs are not as resistant to change, which is why, because they are temporary, right? Which is why we can program and deprogram our beliefs through conditioning, through thought reform, hint, hint. And what beliefs are guesses about the nature of reality, right? They are what you can infer about reality based on your subjective experience of first and second order reality. And that's also why they're so easy to change, why beliefs are so easy to change, right? Because your experience of reality is always changing. So your opinion is what you know about reality because you've reinforced it through a belief or a system of beliefs. And because they are more dense, because opinions have this dense quality to them, they can be tested. They can be held up to scrutiny and evaluated against other opinions. Your truth is your experience of reality. Your beliefs are your interpretations or inferences about reality. And your opinion is a conclusion or a theory that you land on based on your interpretations and experiences. So your beliefs are like theories about the world. And just like all theories, in order for it to be valid, they need to be falsifiable. Okay, this is where critical thinking and logic and science becomes very scientific. Because if your opinion is not falsifiable, meaning you cannot disprove it, then it's not valid. Your opinion is not valid. And yes, you can absolutely have wrong opinions. Absolutely. Because if you can't, if it doesn't hold up to scrutiny against the other opinions and the other doctrines and the other theories and the frameworks, right? If it doesn't hold up to scrutiny, if it just falls apart when you critically examine it, then it's not valid. And the way that we can like buffer against that in, if we're playing mental gymnastics, is we frame our opinion in a way that makes it not falsifiable. So for example, my opinion is that unicorns exist. Well, I can't prove that. I can't prove that unicorns exist, right? So it's not falsifiable. So it's not valid because you can't prove it. And like in any scientific experiment, if you can't prove something, if you can't measure it, then it's not valid. And when I say it's not valid, I don't mean that you should like throw it in the trash. I mean, you should approach it with like a healthy level of skepticism and a dose of scrutiny, right? You can still adopt it, sure, but you should also know that you're gonna get challenged on it. It's gonna be critically examined, and if you don't know how to like defend yourself other than just say, well, that's my truth and that's the way it is, and I'm sorry that is triggering you, then it's like, okay, well, you're just living in a fucking fantasy delusion that is not connected, that is not representative in any way, shape, or form of like actual reality, of the nature of reality. And we're constantly trying to understand the nature of reality. I mean, that's what science is, right? Science is the most objective, like not science itself, but like the scientific process is the closest that we can get to understanding the nature of reality, because we cannot understand it through our biases. So the scientific method does a pretty good job, not perfect, right? It's absolutely not perfect, but it does a pretty damn good job, as good as it can be right now with the current level of technology that we have, to capture something about the nature of reality, right? And then we share that in a public arena, and we discuss it, and we tear it apart, and we stomp on it, and then we resurrect it. I mean, it's changing, and we have sort of this like collective struggle towards understanding the nature of reality. Because then we can build a world, we can create systems that make sense. We can create societies that make sense, right? The more we understand the nature of reality, right? So if we form, going back to this idea of falsifiability, so if we form our opinion around an unfalsifiable conclusion about reality, such as my opinion is that unicorns exist, because you can't prove it wrong, you're going to think you're always right. Because, then there's this unfalsifiability fallacy that happens when someone says, well, if I can't prove that unicorns exist, then you can't prove that they don't exist. That means that there is a 50-50 chance that I'm right, that unicorns do exist. No, it does not work that way. That is a fallacy. That is a logical fallacy, because it is impossible to prove the absence of something. You cannot prove that something doesn't exist. And people think that just because you can't prove the absence of something, so if they express an opinion and they say that it's their truth, and you can't quite prove them wrong, they think that because you can't prove them wrong, they have like an equal shot at being right about it. But no, actually, it's because you can't prove it wrong. It's because it's not falsifiable that it's not valid. Not valid in a sense, not valid does not mean it doesn't matter. It means that it's subjective. It means that the subjectivity of it is an illusion, and you cannot generalize it as a representation of the nature of reality. You see how when you start to poke holes in people's thinking, it just like falls apart? So that's kind of the framework that I have for understanding truth and beliefs and opinions. And what I want to conclude with here is the importance of reality testing. And reality testing is it's a cult deprogramming method that includes or rather entails the ability to critically examine your own thoughts, which is really, really hard if you've already been like, quote unquote, brainwashed, or there's been like some thought control and some thought reform happening, right? If your consciousness is hijacked, it's really hard to critically examine your thinking, your own thinking process. But I mean, that's where meditation comes in, right? And that's the practice of presence, is to watch your thoughts, and watch whether or not you're offering up a truth, a belief, or an opinion when you are having discussions with people in a public arena. Think about it, right? Think about, so when you want a reality test, right? And this is like, I'm not saying do this on the spot, but when you reflect on your thinking, or you watch your thoughts in meditation, you can think about how subjective is this, right? And number two, how falsifiable is it? Can somebody come and prove me wrong about this opinion? Can they prove me wrong? Can it be measured in a way in a lab, and can I be proven wrong about this? And if the answer is no, then it's likely that what you're expressing is a truth or a belief, because truths and beliefs are not falsifiable, right? There's no way that somebody can come in and disprove that you're experiencing reality the way that you say you're experiencing it. This is why it's such fucking bullshit, excuse me, but it really pisses me off when people like Phil Goodman say, or Good or whatever, say, what did he say that was just so like, he said something to the effect of, basically what I'm trying to say is he's making assumptions about how somebody experiences their reality. Oh, it's because you're not free. Oh, it's because you don't feel comfortable expressing your truth. It's like, what the fuck? Like, yes, I do. Like, who are you to tell me what is happening with my own comfort levels? If I feel uncomfortable or uncomfortable, like, that is such a large like leap and a large assumption that we make about people, because we're just like, we think we can like assume an unknowable arena. We don't know if someone is not expressing their truth because they don't feel free. Maybe it's that person is still like, I don't know, feeling insecure, or maybe that person just doesn't feel like it. Maybe in that moment it doesn't feel, whatever it might be. Maybe the person is fucking hungry and tired and doesn't feel like it. I don't know, whatever, my point is, you cannot make assumptions about other people in this like generalized way that, oh, if you get triggered, that means that you're not free somewhere. It's like, well, first of all, how do you know that I'm triggered? Like, that's a very specific trauma word. Just because I express concern or I challenge you does not necessarily mean that I'm triggered. Like, that's a very specific, that's an assumption that you're making about how somebody experiences their reality. Right? And it's like, it's problematic because it happens everywhere. We're just making assumptions, and we actually don't know. We actually don't know how someone is experiencing their reality. If they're triggered or if they're fucking just, I don't know, constipated. I don't know, you know? Like, they need to tell us, like, hey, I'm really triggered by this. Or, hey, I feel really angry about this, right? Just because you're angry doesn't necessarily mean you're triggered either. That's just one expression. I mean, I just mean that it doesn't make sense to just draw a blanket conclusion about someone's opinion, especially if you can't even disprove it, especially if it's something that occurs in a very their a truth or their beliefs, if it's occurring within such an unknowable territory, right? So, sorry, I just went on this rant there that wasn't in my show notes. So anyway, your beliefs are somewhat falsifiable, okay? So someone can challenge you on your beliefs because, again, if it's dogmatic or if it's flexible, right? But they can't necessarily, I don't think they can necessarily prove you wrong without suggesting that your experience of the world is somehow wrong, right? Because there's no wrong or right way to experience reality. You just experience it. And that's why I say beliefs are not wrong or right? They're either dogmatic or flexible. They're either biased or unbiased. So that's a place that, you can critically examine your beliefs, right? By asking, how subjective is it? Is it falsifiable? Can someone prove me wrong? And then you can see, okay, it's biased, right? And it's okay. It's okay to have biased beliefs. We all have them. It's fine. Just know it. Just be aware, right? Be aware so that when somebody comes in and like challenges you, you're not like, oh my God, you're so fucking triggered right now, right? You can have like a conversation. You can have there's room for conversation and there's room for growth, right? Like, how are you going to grow if you think that someone who challenges you is triggered and not free and you're somehow better than them, right? You're not going to grow thinking that you like know everything. So your opinions are, so where do we leave off at? Okay, so your truth, I like to like recap just so I'm not like going off the rails. So I was saying that your truth is not falsifiable, which means that it's very, very subjective. Your beliefs are somewhat falsifiable, which means that they can be biased or unbiased. And your opinions are 100% falsifiable. They're like 110% falsifiable, right? So meaning they can prove you wrong with logic, with facts, with statistics, with evidence, quote unquote, right? With science. So this is why there are good opinions and bad opinions depending on how grounded those opinions are in logic and reasoning and in reality. And again, this is so important for reality testing. Being able to challenge your thought patterns, being able to discern your beliefs from biased and unbiased, from this is the practice of discerning illusion from reality, and this is what is so important for not creating an echo chamber in your own head, right? Because if you have an echo chamber in your head, then it's like it just gives someone an open door to sell you a belief sell a belief to you as some infallible truth that can never be proven wrong, right? And then you easily adopt their truth as your truth, and it's never wrong. And this is what happens in cults. And a cult leader, Phil Good and Gabby Bernstein, just gonna say their names because why not? I'm on my soapbox. So a cult leader will tell you that their truth is the ultimate truth, or they will, even if they don't tell you that, like the way they phrase it, right? Here's the truth, right? Well, if you're gonna say here's the truth, like say something that's like actually, I don't know, eternal. I don't know. Anyway, there's so many ways that you can play around with language, that you can use language, that you can express yourself and communicate in a way that does not come off as, that does not create so much confusion and misunderstanding, and then use that to make assumptions about other people and then just like cut off any chance of like discourse. It's like, okay, where are we going with that? So, what else do I want to say here? Yeah, just be careful when people are presenting their truth as fact. Watch out, because this person is probably trying to indoctrinate you, knowingly or unknowingly. So I have a couple of more suggestions for reality testing, but I just want to give a quick recap of what we talked about. So your truth to be valid, in the sense that it represents the nature of reality and it is knowable to someone outside of yourself, then it needs to be falsifiable. You need to be able to prove it right or wrong. If you can't prove it wrong, that doesn't mean that it's not valid, okay? It doesn't mean that you should just throw it in the trash and everything has to be like go through some fucking experiment science lab. That's not what I mean. What I'm trying to point to is the importance of understanding subjectivity, because if it's not, because if it's a subjective truth, right, it's just not a reliable way of reality testing, because you're just lost in your own like echo chamber. How are you going to reality test if you're just having this subjective experience of reality, right? And it just leaves you in this biased place of thinking you're always right, and you're just can't examine your thought patterns. And you're going to stay emotionally and spiritually stagnant, and not to mention you might mislead others because you're so convinced that your truth is the truth. So a couple of more reality testing exercises I can give you is to get into the habit of asking, what am I missing? What don't I know? Right? And this kind of goes hand in hand with, could I be wrong? Is it falsifiable? So what am I missing is a really good one that I like to ask myself. Like, what don't I know? And it's not something that is just gonna like come to you like immediately. The point is not to actually arrive at an answer. You may or you may not, but just asking it, it invites the process of reality testing. That's all you have to do, is just ask. And just be there. That's it. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to, change your life or your practice or whatever, or your opinion even. Like, it doesn't even have to happen like immediately or overnight or whatever. It's just asking. It's just a question. What am I missing? What don't I know? Another thing I think is super important is to listen to other perspectives, right? I think it was Stephen Hassan, the occult expert, that says that the best way out of, I'm paraphrasing, but he says the best way out of echo chambers is through perspective. And remembering that, yes, indeed, other people's truths are just as valid and they can coexist. Phil, other people's truth can definitely coexist. However, you need to discern first order truth from second order truth. You need to discern between truth versus opinion versus belief, right? There's a lot that goes on there that gets missed. So that's all that I have for you today. And of course, that was a lot. So thanks so much for listening. And I hope that this was useful for you. Of course, we can hear it and we can sort of conceptualize it, but it really needs to be practiced. And I support you through this practice. In my content that I create on social media, in my stories, I'm always bringing up examples, and so I'll start to use some of these terms more about first order reality and second order reality, and the paradox of truth and reality testing and all of that. So I'll introduce those concepts more and more as we start to really practice it, right? And like I said, in my stories and also in my newsletter. So if you're not signed up for my newsletter and you enjoy my teachings, I highly recommend it. I send a newsletter once a week, and this is where I kind of take a deeper dive into some of the concepts that we talk about. And I really, I get more specific about things, right? I break things down more. So if you enjoy this and you're not subscribed to my newsletter, please do so. Otherwise, thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this experience where we're just learning and growing together, and coming up with solutions for how we can really, live authentically, which to me means, preserve our individuality when we're constantly being bombarded with so many mixed messages and so much ambiguity, right? And how to develop literacy, media literacy, and critical thinking, and also, have a foundation that is so ingrained, into existence itself, which is where non-dualism comes in. All of that, right? So many layers, and it's a beautiful process. I hope that you're passionate about it. I certainly am. And as always, I'm super grateful for you and for your presence. I honor you. I honor your learning and your growth and your journey. And with that said, I will talk to you soon. Bye.